Hi, friends. My name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People. I also go by the name Eric Strauss. As you can see, I'm a well-dressed professional operating in a pretty elegant setting here. And today I'd like to talk to you about cognitive functions because I am, after all, the world's greatest typologist. So, I'm working on a document, and it's about the function axes and how we can think about the functions. We typically think of them as being on one axis. For example, extroverted sensing is on the same axis as introverted intuition. But let's explore the fact that we can describe function axes relationships in more ways than that. Let's look at the first one. You might call your 1-4 function axis as the devil's bargain. And why? Well, every type is defined by the imbalance between the first and fourth slot. For example, in order to maximally attain results from experiential knowledge, SI, requires that one use it at full power, but also that one not be entirely trapped by it. This means that both the SI knowledge function and the NE action function, which ideates possibilities distinct from that experience, are conscious or voluntary ways of paying attention. Of course, it also means that extroverted intuition plays a minor support role, serving the introverted sensing by making it less rigid, but otherwise not representing a significant portion of attention paid. In the end, every type ultimately feels a longing linked to their fourth slot function. Sounds like this. If I could only pay a little more attention in that way, I'd be a lot better off. So the thing to note about the devil's bargain function axis is the 1 and the 4 are different kinds of functions. The 1 is absolute, the 4 is different kind of values. The 1 is absolute, the 4 is instrumental. And of course, they're complementary kinds of functions. So you can't have an action function without also having the corresponding knowledge function on the front stack. Okay, let's not spend too much time with excessive explanation. Let's try to keep this nice and metaphorical to the extent that we can. Your first and fifth slot functions might be called besties. And the reason for this is, first of all, they're both absolute values, but the first is voluntary and the fifth is involuntary or unconscious. So when a person says to themselves, gosh, I wish I used my fourth slot function for more, their fifth slot function says, nonsense. That's the wrong metric upon which to legitimize things. You're doing great by prioritizing the end of the axis you were prioritizing, and would be misguided to prioritize the other. After all, look at all the things in the world that are good and bad. The worst of them don't uphold my, Mr. Fifth Slot Functions, values. You hate people like that. You don't want to be like that, so don't let boring old fourth slot function trick you into thinking it's actually important. And of course, 1 and 5 get along great because they see eye to eye. Now, obviously, I'm speaking in metaphor here. And if you want a more TI heavy or precise kind of articulation of how functions work, that's for a different video. But in exchange for a lack of precision with my language, what you get today instead is an increased amount of positivity in the visual fields. So I look nicer, you can believe in me more as a consequence. This guy definitely knows what he's doing, he's got a tie on. Okay, let's go down. 1 and 8 are autocrat and underling. So for an action type like me, I've got an action function 1 and I've got an action function 8. For a knowledge type like Rachel, she's got a knowledge function 1, she's got a knowledge function 8. And this is true for everybody. So the fact is, the reason we might call it autocrat and underling is that my extroverted sensing is pretty good, very active in some sense, but it's always doing the bidding of my extroverted intuition. So what do I need to do in order for these words to be heard more successfully? Well, maybe I should change my clothes. Because when I originally sat down to do this, I had my green Talking with Famous People shirt on, and it blended in with the green screen. And so I said, well, I got to change my shirt. And once I said to change my shirt, I said, well, I might as well try dressing up a little bit. Note, I don't have any pants on. I've got underwear on, but okay. So the autocrat and underling thing is, for me, extroverted intuition is driving the bus, and extroverted sensing my extroverted sensing attentional manner kicks in as it needs to, in support of, and at the beck and call of my extroverted intuition, under the management of my third slot extroverted feeling. Everybody's like this with their 1-8. So Rachel can produce plenty of instances of SI examples when they're supporting her NI. When her SI contradicts her NI, then she ignores it, and it doesn't get to contribute, really. All right, now let's go on to the next one. Bilingual 4-5. So the 4-5 function is one in which you could think of yourself as a translator who can translate between people who have each other's tool as their polar. So you take an ISTP and an INTP. INTP is SE polar. That means they're blind towards the concrete experiential kind of action. ISTP is NE polar. That means they're blind to the ideational kind of action. The type that's most likely to be able to bridge the communication gap between the two of them is somebody who's got SE4, NE5, or vice versa. So you're talking about your ISFJs or your INFJs. No, wait. SI, no, that would be SE. So you're talking about like, yeah, right. So if you're an ISFJ, you've got NE4 and SE5. If you're an INFJ, you've got SE4 and NE5. Either way, you can essentially utilize both as a subject. So you can meaningfully convey to others things to be taken from a given attentional manner that those others might be blind to, because you can convert between the two with your 4-5. That means I can both appeal to somebody's introverted intuition and the absolute truth of what I'm saying, or the singularity of it, the holistic, irreducible truth, but I can also give plenty of examples and try to concretize things experientially so that people can understand it that way. I can explain cognitive functions to somebody who's NI polar, and I can explain it to somebody who's SI polar. Granted, it's harder to explain it to somebody who's NI polar than SI polar. Now let's go down to the next one. 4-8, insecure me. And this is insecurity expresses in two different ways. 4 is, yeah, you're right, I'm shitty at that. It's self-deprecating. 8 is actually insecure. You get your feelings hurt if you get critiqued on your 8. You get very thorny if somebody's pushing on your 8 too much, requiring you to provide too much of that kind of attention. And ultimately what you think is, I use that function correctly, and the people who are celebrated for using it well are using it too much. It's also, I think, the most unconscious function, 8. So, like, ENTPs are going to kind of have this MV-hatery thing about SE DOMs sometimes. And same thing with SE DOMs towards NE DOMs. Because it's one of our insecurity areas. 5-8, counterfeit. So here's the thing. Because your dominant function is driving the bus with your 8 all the time. In other words, your 8 slot function is the same kind of function as your dominant. If your dominant is action, your 8th is action. If your dominant is deliberation, your 8th is deliberation. If your dominant is interface, your 8th is interface. It's denying the 8 slot function its natural axis pair. So in other words, my extroverted sensing doesn't look towards introverted intuition for what to do, like it would if the two were on the front stack. Instead, extroverted intuition is driving the bus, and it's extroverted intuition is consciously knowing via introverted sensing. So there's any knowledge function behind the action taking of SE, it's an SI kind of knowledge function, not an NI, which contributes to why I frequently take actions that don't seem to have any particular point or benefit. Except to express myself, right? 2-3 is the performer manager. So, when you're younger, you probably have a lot of conflict between your 2-3, where you tended to treat your 2 as though it were an absolute value, and your 3 as though it were getting in the way of that absolute value. In reality, as you grow older, you realize 3's the manager who has the big picture in mind for you. 2 is you in the throes of battle. So your tool function is something that you're using so constantly and regularly that you're very familiar with its ins and outs. And as a consequence, sometimes performing well in that function means sacrificing some of the larger goals that are established by your third slot function. Since the third slot function is an absolute value for the self or a scorecard function, then no matter how logical I am, if everybody hates me, my manager says, "Okay, we're gonna have to revisit our choreography here for this show because it's not. No matter how right you are, it doesn't matter if everybody hates you." That's for me with 2-3 TIFE. If you've got, say, 2-3 NESI, like you are an INFP or an INTP, what that means is there's a conflict early on where you think all these various possibilities are the important things until you realize that what's really important is the story of self you're building through a succession of chosen and carefully deliberated out experiences. And the ideation needs to not undermine that ultimate goal, or it's going to be ontological distress that you're going to have to resolve. Now look here. This is one. Well, let me go back to here. So there are 6 different ways you can describe a given axes, right? So if I know my dominant function, I know my 4th, I know my 5th, I know my 8th. And each of those functions relates to each other in sort of what you might call an axis. So yes, the 1-4 is the natural axis, but 1-5 is just as natural an axis, really, and 1-8 is just as natural an axis, and 4-5 is just as natural an axis, and 4-8 is, and 5-8 too. At least for the purposes of understanding functions, it helps us to see how these two things relate to each other, right? So just as there were 6 for the dominant function, there are also 6 for the tool function. And we did performer manager. The next one here is 2-6. Work I like, work I don't like. Either way, it's work. But the 6 slot function is the work that you feel like you have to do, you don't like, but you accept that you have to do it for the outside world. You'll do it when there's external pressure to produce something beyond what you are naturally going to easily produce, which is your second. You probably won't bring your 6 slot function home, but you probably won't bring your 2nd slot function home very much either, which is to say, when you're totally on your own time and autonomously making your decisions and your will is maximally free, you won't willfully choose to engage in intentional manners of 6, and you won't prioritize as a value 2. I'd rather things be unfair for me and I give more than I take in general because my 3rd slot function is FE. I like the rewards of that more than I prioritize the actual fairness value implicit in TI. Just because TI is an instrumental value and FE is an absolute value. So that's what I mean by work I like. 2 is easy work for me. It's how I naturally go about doing anything. If I'm going to do anything with my extroverted intuition, I'm going to end up probably, most of the time, parsing with my TI. When I try to do any FE stuff, it's probably going to come out like a comedy thing or something, and that's not nearly as well received. So I put up a bit of a comedy video under 5 minutes long just the other day, and it's got 66% likes, and it's got a small ratio of likes for the views, and I guess it just wasn't that funny, you know? So I thought it was an amusing idea, but others disagreed. And I have to respect in that area that they're wiser than I. On the TI area, I don't have to respect that because I actually am probably better than they are at it, especially given the fact that I'm an NESI user who's got a lot of experience now in terms of parsing this stuff. So my TI is bolstered by things that have already been parsed and remembered, and I'm pretty. This whole thing I'm presenting here is pretty undefeatable. It is the dominant winning argument about cognitive functions across the board. There's not any disputing that among people who use TI and are able to determine via parsing that I'm correct rather than needing to use heuristics. Among people who need to use heuristics, this helps them to understand that I'm correct. The fact that I'm wearing a tie and a shirt and a hat and I've got a nice background. 3-6. What I want to control and how others want to control me. Now, this is how I perceive others as wanting to control me. So, what I want to control is I'd like everybody to perceive me as competent, correct, and also likable, warm, authentic, and all those things. And afford me the status of important person who matters a lot and who I want to give my attention to. So you might call me an attention whore. I like people to pay attention to me. I like to be the center of attention. I used to live stream a lot, partially because it allowed me the chance to pontificate about whatever topic people brought up in the chat that they wanted. And I'm the only one who had the vocal space. They had to communicate via text. I mean, it's like the ultimate selfish third slot FE, right? But 6, I see as what I have to do to keep other people satisfied. In other words, in order to function adequately in the world, I have to have a certain amount of attention on money, resources, utility, things like that. I have to care somewhat about things that convert directly to monetary or useful rewards versus just things that are rewarding for me to do. And typically, typically it's going to be some external pressure that forces me to attend to TI in my own life. I'll avoid it as long as I can until, the state freezes my bank account for not paying taxes or something. Okay. And 3-7. 3-7 is harvest versus soil, water, and sun. So for me, I'm like, I have FE third. I tend to use myself as an example because I'm an SI type, and it makes things extra clear for me the closer the examples are to the ideas that I'm trying to express. So you could consider myself somebody who eats peaches. You get to the supermarket. I love peaches. I think they're delicious. I like to eat them. I understand that in order for peaches to exist, there needs to be soil, sun, and water. But I almost never think about the soil, sun, and water part when I'm eating the peach. And when somebody says, ooh, well, tough peach harvest this year because there's a water shortage, I'm not very sympathetic. I'm like, figure it out. I'm here to eat peaches. I'm not here complaints from farmers. And at the same time, in my own little private moments, I greatly enjoy planting a seed and watering it and putting it in the sun, even though maybe I'm doing a terrible job of it or whatever. I don't do it to get peaches. I just do it because I like to. That's how you are about your polar, It's like, hey, I'm like a newborn baby, kind of. 2-7. Gunfight versus throwing bananas. So, let's say you're using your 2 to deal with things, as I am now, and somebody comes in and tries to engage in this area with my 7. Say, for example, I say, I'm saying all this stuff, and somebody leaves a comment that indicates, you just want to be right. You're so insistent on that you're correct about this that clearly it's really important to you on a feelings level. And I would say, okay, you brought throwing bananas to a gunfight. Those things are not appropriate things to say or think or realize or understand or whatever, or it has no business in this conversation. My feelings have nothing to do with my claims. And because a person who has, say, FI tool is going to always, for themselves, their feelings have everything to do with their claims. And they're going to find it incredibly difficult to imagine a world in which somebody is not, first and foremost, biased by their feelings. But of course, TI is an objective parsing function. In other words, when I say statements, I choose to say them based, in part anyway, on their defensibility. I anticipate before I say statements whether and what kind of response they're going to get that's negationary, and why that negationary response oughtn't win the point. If I can think of negationary responses that ought to win the point, then obviously I'm not going to say the point. I'm never going to make the claim in the first place. And I have enough experience, as well as being an extroverted intuitor, enough experience with both cognitive functions, enough experience with debate and rhetoric as a debate coach, enough experience of just living years of talking to people that nowadays it's pretty rare that I make claims I regret, that claims I don't feel like I can defend in the end. I do sometimes, as learning, figuring out this cognitive function stuff has obviously been somewhat trial and error. So there's some old videos in which I explore some notions that I end up nixing because they just don't end up making good logical sense. It's usually unnecessary additions. The thing about cognitive functions is it's very lean in its proper understanding. It's not complicated. Each of us is, you can think of people as being 16 types of vehicles. And each of us fundamentally is the kind of vehicle that we are. So if you're a motorcycle, you're a motorcycle. You're not going to be good at carrying loads of lumber in the back of your pickup truck if you're a motorcycle. If you're a pickup truck, a work truck, you're not going to be very good at dropping off movie stars at the red carpet. It's like, people are a species of thing, okay? Like, the whole idea of a species is that it's an identity from which particular deviation can never generate a category distinction. So no matter how big or small or hairless or funny looking or weird barking my dog is, it's still a dog. There's no way to change the individual in particular ways that changes species. And the same thing is true of personality types. When people give tests that say, okay, well, you scored 50 points on NE, you scored 40 points on SE, you scored 30 points, it's totally not getting the way cognitive functions work. You can't evaluate cognitive functions like that because they're always a relationship between things, as indicated here. So, in fact, there's always a set of relationships. The other factor to remember is people utilize these functions as subject, agents, or objects. And that links somewhat to the kind of function and somewhat to the slot. So, for example, the 2-6, those are both subject slots. You expect to use your 2 function as a subject engaging with the world, and you expect to have to use your 6 slot function as a subject engaging with the world. The 2 function is much more robust in that you can use it as an object, which is natural for TI for me. It's naturally an object function. That is to say, it treats words as though they're directed at you so you can parse them and decide what to do with them, right? But I use it as a subject primarily. But I can use it as an object. I can use it much less so as an agent, though, which means I know, I observe via extroverted intuition in some sense. I don't just take action with it. I don't just evaluate the novelty of things. I observe for opportunities to take extroverted intuition action. I'm prepared to extrovertedly intuit as I move through the world at all times. Whereas with TI, it's not that sort of state of readiness at all times. Instead, things present themselves to me and I bust out that tool again habitually. So, to understand a human being at all is to first determine which configuration they are. If you don't know what configuration a human being is, then you're trying to describe who they are against a false mean that doesn't exist. It is not the case that we are all the same person deviating from the same mean. It is the case that we are all one of 16 different kinds of people, fundamentally. And exactly 16. To the extent that you want to establish subtypes, I would go with Enneagram. I'd be careful with that, though. It is the case that Enneagram and cognitive functions are not mutually exclusive. Enneagram tries to tell you how you will likely react to looming shame, fear, or anger in real time. Namely, whether you're, the 891 tells you basically your level of assertiveness. The 234 tells you basically the manner of your engagement with community, whether it's as a active and willing teammate, whether it's as somebody who's trying to attain leadership status within the group, or whether it's somebody who's positions themselves as an outsider or juxtaposes against those mores. And then the third set, which is your head set, is responsiveness to fear, whether you tend to research more, whether you tend to, rely on your existing resources and conscientiousness, or whether you try to distract yourself. So I had an interesting result with Rachel and Peter Dentici's Enneagram testing over the other day. She came out with as many scores as many points in 7 as she did as in 5. Those were her 2 top scoring numbers. But of course, if you go with the tri-type model, then your first one is the most clear. Your second one is mushy a little bit. Your third one looks like something other than it is often. So it doesn't really make any sense to say that Rachel would be scoring most high in 7 and 5. That would be like saying, well, Eric, you score most high in NE and SE. Well, it's getting the frame wrong. I don't score most high in SE and NE. Because you're not measuring height, right? It's not like a physical attribute. Instead, it's a specific relationship of processes that define the position of each of the processes defines the role of the other. So anyhow, if Enneagram's not like that, then it's arbitrary anyway. It doesn't matter. If it is like that, then you have to choose either the wings or the tri-type. You can't have both. And that's just all there is to it. I got a little sidetracked here at the end. I couldn't help it. But this is the thing I made. It's part of a larger document I'm making. Oh, I almost left one off. The best one of all. 6-7, the Eddie Murphy. The Eddie Murphy was an actor who was successful as an actor, good enough to at least sell tickets to the movies, right? But he was also an actor who frequently looked as though he didn't really want to be doing what he was doing, and he was doing it for the money. On the other hand, what he really wanted to do was be a singer. And so that's why he made one of the worst albums of all time, featuring the hit song My Girl Wants to Party All the Time, which she does until that song comes on, in which case everybody wants to go home. So 6-7 is like, you're good at your 6th function, but you don't like it. You're shitty at your 7th function, but you do like it. Now, you're not likely to be so silly like Eddie Murphy is to try to record an album in your 7th function, but if you were to, you'd make My Girl Wants to Party All the Time. So that sums it up for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and afford me extra legitimacy in your own head, because I'm so well dressed and in such an elegant office. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.